in a passing lead in today's NFL, what do you need defensively to combat that? Edge pressure. Who are the top 5 edge rushers over the last decade in terms of draft prospects? Myles Garrett, Nick Bosa, Joey Bosa. We'll discuss it next on the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast.
You are Locked On NFL Draft, your daily podcast covering the NFL Draft. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Locked On family? Let's get locked in. Welcome back to the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast, your daily podcast covering your favorite draft prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your boy, Damian Parson, always on the ones and twos. You can find and follow me on Twitter at DP_NFL. I'm a national scout over with the Draft Network and your favorite and local running back guru. And of course, Mr. LSU, the man with the ring, the champ is here. My guy, Keith Sanchez. You can find and follow him on Twitter at The Talent Code. Keith, talk to him, baby.
What's up, Locked On family? Let's get locked in. This is Keith Sanchez, senior draft analyst with the Draft Network, man, and 2019 national champ with those LSU Tigers, man. But you know why we're here, man? The dynamic duo, myself, Damian Parsons. We're here to bring you championship level content surrounding the NFL draft that we say what the draft is 24/7, 365. The draft don't stop over here with the Locked On NFL Draft guys, man. So listen, we're going to keep this thing going as everyone knows, right? You've been listening to the past probably 5 episodes. We've been going through revisionist history, right? We're going through, man, we're talking about the best prospects over the last 10 drafts, right? And not what they've done in the NFL, but who they were coming out of college. So we're ranking our top 5 draft prospects, and then we're having some fun in-depth conversations following that. But if you listen, right, you know who's on the offensive side of the ball. You know what? I appreciate offensive guys, but you know deep down inside, purely, I'm a defensive side, right? Like that's what I do. I'm a defensive guy. I love the defensive side of the football. So we decided to kick this thing off with edge rushers. We did offensive tackles yesterday. We talked about how important offensive tackles were. Now we got to talk about the guys that they battle, rep in, rep out, play in, and play out. And that is the edge rushers, the DP. Man, why don't you kick us off with your top 5 edge rushers over the past 10 years? Go 1 through 5.
As you guys, like he said, if you have listened, you would know I'm going to say the same thing I've said consistently. This has not been easy. So at number 1, I'm going to go Myles Garrett. At number 2, Khalil Mack. Number 3, Nick Bosa. Number 4, Joey Bosa. And number 5, Will Anderson Jr.
Okay, so you threw in the most recent guy. I didn't know if I wanted to do that because I'm like, it's really close. So I was trying to see tough. I was trying to see how I was going to go about it. So I went Joey Bosa 1, then I went Myles Garrett 2, then I went Chase Young 3, then I went Jadeveon Clowney 4, and then I finally threw Will Anderson in at the 5th spot.
You got 2 guys, Keith, that I really I kind of tossed and turned back and forth with, and that was the Jadeveon Clowney. Of course, being a South Carolina boy myself, I saw this guy all the time when he played at SC, right? And the famous hit against Michigan, that probably was the main reason why he got drafted, right? Where he knocked the guy helmet off, and that's a hit of the decade, right? And then it was Chase Young, and I remember like Chase Young was so. It was like, all right, I had to tell myself, I cannot fill this list with Ohio State Buckeyes. Like, I just can't have 3 to 4 of these guys on this list. So I was like, somebody ain't gonna make the cut. And it was Chase Young. But I'm gonna tell you guys a story. Like, Myles Garrett is my number 1, but I had to kind of go back and revision this type of history, because when Myles Garrett came out, he also came out in the class with Derek Barnett, who was coming out of Tennessee at the time. Mm-hmm. And at that time, which was like 2014, 2015?
2015,
yeah. I was young Dame. I was young DP, man. And
it wasn't full-time Dame. That was young Dame.
I wasn't full-time Dame, dog. So I was a stickler for technicians, man. And Derek Barnett was such a technically refined guy. Great hands, punch placement, timing, everything. Then we look at Myles Garrett, he was just that freak athlete, like everything, right? And I had Barnett over Myles Garrett, but that's before I actually a retired scout ended up meeting a retired scout from the league. He ended up taking me on his way and teaching me a lot of things. That's when he taught me about the can and cannots, and all right, and he taught me about traits and stuff, which we'll get into a little bit later in terms of in one of our in the last segment, but he kind of taught me the trick of the trade and what they look for, what they think about from a scouting perspective. So my mind has evolved from a scouting perspective. So if Derek Barnett and Myles Garrett came out in 2022, 2023, yeah, no. Myles Garrett's would have definitely been number one, but I just wanted to give y'all that story. Like, just talk about the growth, because I was very, very like tough on guys who weren't technicians, but like my guy taught me, Big Bro taught me, he said, listen, it's all about size, athleticism. If I can teach it to you, I ain't worried about it. If I can't teach you to be 6'5", 270, I'm worried about it.
Right. No, man, I'm with you. And so DP, when you looking at the list, and I think when you look at the size, athleticism, there isn't one guy that doesn't check that box, right? And the reason I want to compare it is because we look at we looked at wide receivers, right? You look at tight ends, you look at running backs, you look at even the quarterback position. They come in at different sizes, right? Like there's different size thresholds as far as what they offer, but all of these guys are not only like highly talented football players, but when you look at the height, weight, you know what I'm saying? Probably the body fat percentage right there. I think with this, their BMI, BPI, I think it's BMI.
Yeah, BMI, yeah.
Like all of that, like it checks the box, right? Like they are elite across the board. So that was one thing when I was going through this list, DP, I noticed, I'm like, man, like all of these guys, Will Anderson might be the lightest, right? At 240. Yeah, 240, right? But he makes up for the, the battering ram style that he has. But that was something that stuck out to me, DP. I wanted to ask you, was there anything else that stuck out to you when you was listing these guys? Because I'll tell you this real quick too, that when I was listening, I'm like, damn, he was really good. He was really good. Like I thought this was the most like elite level. Like these guys are all, and I'm maybe not Chase Young yet, right? But in Jadeveon Clowney, questionable, but all these guys hit, and then Pro Bowl plus, meaning all pro and potential Hall of Fame-ish type career trajectory. So is there anything else that you picked up on when you was looking at these guys?
Man, I think, when we're looking at them, I even went back, I went and looked at the numbers, and almost all these guys were productive, right? We know Will Anderson has been one of the most productive sack artists and pressure artists in college football over the last 10 years, right? But Myles Garrett, for him, 31 sacks in 3 years. 31 sacks in 3 years with 7 forced fumbles, right? Khalil Mack, 28 and a half sacks in 4 years. And bro, and this is what's crazy. Khalil Mack had 16 forced fumbles in college. Like, and he was playing at Buffalo. Like, so when he would get on, I think when he really stepped on the field, I think it was what really caught a lot of people's attention was against Ohio State, where he was just unblockable. And everybody's like, we talked about with the offensive tackle, seeing those kind of smaller school guys, when you get the chance to go up against big time programs with big time 5-star athletes, you go to show that I'm on the same level, if not better than they are. I just play at a smaller school. So same thing with Nick Bosa got hurt midway through his final year, so he kind of shut it down from that abdominal injury, but he was productive. Joey Bosa was productive. All these guys checked so many different boxes for what we look for at edge rushers, whether it's technique, size, or athleticism. These guys check those boxes, and that was the biggest thing that stood out to me, Keith, is that the boxes that we want to check, the guys that we listed, all of them, they checked all of them. In some way, shape, or form, they checked all of them.
No, legit all of them, right? Like that's what we said. They didn't miss any athletic threshold, height threshold, weight threshold, and production threshold. So they hit on all of them. So I think that's pretty. When we talk about tendencies and things like that, right? Like that's something that you probably, will elevate more. Like, okay, I want to make sure this guy, that the guys in the past have hit all of these thresholds as far as becoming very productive players in the NFL. So when we're going through with our scouting lens and applying that's something that we probably, that you may want to lean towards. And I know I definitely lean towards it, right? But DP, man, look, we're going to keep this thing going. Yesterday we talked about offensive tackles and we talked about versatility is key, right? But we know that, right, the counterparts and talking about these edge rushers, that they're asked to do a lot of things, and not only asked to do a lot of things, but there's a multiplicity as far as edge rushers, right? There's 4-3 hand in the ground. There's 3-4 guys. There's guys that's 235 pounds like Von Miller, right? Then there's guys that's 275 pounds, like like other edge rushers, like you call those Dunlaps, and just other guys that've been productive. So DP, we want to talk about what is the perfect edge, right? And how do you apply that? And then when you're watching guys, what's the difference between a 4-3 hand in the ground guy and a 3-4 edge rusher, stand up that can drop in space. So let's get into that and let's have that conversation.
This episode is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Baseball season is in full swing, and there's no better place to bet on all the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. Guys, you heard me correctly. Let me say it one more time. That's $1,000, up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. What do you need to do? Simple. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to join today. If you're a Yankees fan, if you're a Mets fan, if you're a Braves fan, an Oriole fan, an Angel fan, whatever team you rep in terms of baseball, you can bet on your team to try and win some money, or bet on some other teams or against some teams to try and win some money. Very simple. So you don't want to miss the chance to snag a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. So all you need to do is just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon today to sign up. FanDuel is the official partner of Major League Baseball. Building the perfect edge, Keith, and I listened to him in the first segment. You know, we both did, and for me, it's like I look for, like you said, the variety of what you see, because you get the guys like a Will Anderson Jr. who's 240, who in college he 3-point stance, 2-point stance, 4-point stance, 5 technique, 4 out, like he did all these different things. Then you get the Von Millers, who I think, if I remember, it's been a while, but Von Miller at Texas A&M was kind of similar in terms he did play with his hand in the dirt, but being 35 pounds, 240 or whatever he was listed at, he was more of a stand-up guy, that 3-4 edge where, you know, he's already in that track stance, right? And I think that's where those guys who are quick twitch, explosive, and bendy, those guys are typically going to be those 3-4 edge rushers, like you talked about. Then you get the guys who are built, you know what I mean, like the Nick Bosa, like the Myles Garrett and Joey Bosa, where they're going to put their hand in the dirt. TJ Watt is a perfect example of a 3-4 outside linebacker, because he's not somebody you want to put in a 3-point, 4-point stance and you tell him, because at the end of the day, what ends up happening is guys got to defend the run too. So what's the best advantage for them to defend said run? You know what I mean? And it's not, if it's not putting them putting a smaller guy hand in the dirt where they got to shoot up from such a low trajectory, rather than putting them in the track stance, they can shoot their hands, get their hands activated and engaged, set the edge. But then at the same time, when it comes onto the pass rush, they're already at an advantage because the tackle got to get out of their stance. Well, this guy's already up, primed, and ready to go. I think for me, the perfect edge, I'm going to throw out a name, is Myles Garrett, man. 6'4", 6'5", 275, elite level athlete at his size. And I think it was Brandon Thorne. Shout out to Brandon Thorne, one of the best in the business over at Bleacher Report. Does a lot of stuff with the trench work with offensive line and defensive line. He put up a clip, I think it was yesterday, of, I think it was Browns versus the Lions, and Myles Garrett beats a triple team to get the sack on the quarterback because he used a fake spin move. And I'm like, this shouldn't, you know what I'm saying? Like, this shouldn't be happening, right? Like,
not
he shouldn't
6'5", 260.
He shouldn't be able to do the things that he does, but then he also has like a Euro step. Like, he's so much more flexible and fluid for a guy that's built the way he is. So, like, if you ask me, DP, if you want to put a name on the perfect edge, to me, it's Myles Garrett.
Well, I think so. I do appreciate that, right? But then let's look at the other side of the coin. That's the reason why we're having this conversation, right? And that's going to be, let's go with somebody else that's been extremely productive. Like, are we going to say that that Myles Garrett is better than Von Miller? You can't necessarily say that. And so I think that's why we're having this conversation about 4-3 and 3-4, right? Because you ask somebody and be like, man, what's my perfect edge rushing? It's like, okay, I think it almost goes towards the conversation of what does your team value, right? And then now we get into scheme, because I will go with some guys through the draft, DP, Trayvon Walker, right? And he did a lot of those different things, stood up on the edge, put his hand on the ground on the edge, got kicked inside the defensive tackle, right? And it's like, okay, what kind of player is this? But I think it's always, you want to put players in the most athletic, advantageous situations, right? Same thing with Tyree Wilson, right? He came out this draft and it's like, okay, is he a hand in the ground guy? Is he a stand-up edge rusher? Is he a defensive tackle and you kick him inside? But I think it also, DP, it affects this, man. It affects their sack production, right? Because when you draft a guy and then you give him the quote-unquote edge label, I think people mentally, right, like you automatically transition to, I want Myles Garrett sack production. I want Von Miller sack production. I want one of the Bosa brothers type sack production, Khalil Mack, right? And you want to make sure that you draft a guy and put him in the right spot. And so that's why I like with the conversation with, the 4-3 edge versus the 3-4 edge is like, hey, you need to really dive deep into what does your team, what scheme do they play, right? Who do they have playing next to them? And what is their most advantageous situation? Not just filling a team need. Like all edges can't play all situations. Like I think if Von Miller just had the soul to be a hand in the ground guy and take on offensive tackles all day, we would not necessarily see the best versions of Von Miller, right? But his time he spent in Denver, right? Then going to Buffalo, it was a lot of the similar things to where it's like, you know what, let's try to single Von Miller up one-on-one with an offensive tackle and let him win with his athleticism. Now we do have your guys like Myles Garrett where they just do it all, right? And that's just your plug and play guys. But there is a conversation that when we're talking about drafting edge rushers, and we're talking about the elite level, right? But when you go to like your Yannick Ngakwe's and all of those guys that's kind of tier 2, tier 3, what position they play really matters. What stance they come out of really matters for them.
No, 100%. And guys like that where, the same thing. I think the same thing with Nick Bosa. Like Nick Bosa is not somebody that I want standing up in a 2-point stance a lot. You know what I mean? I don't view him as like the most fluid in terms of lower body movement to be able to dip and turn, and different things like that. But what he has is the hand placement, technically just super refined as a technician. Like, and I think that was a big thing when I remember watching him versus his brother was the body type. He had, and I remember like seeing him in person at the combine when he came out, and I was like, he's not as like I'm 5'5", so yeah, I'm a short king, guys, but I'm standing not too, you know what I'm saying? I'm like very close to Nick Bosa, and I was like, he's not that tall of me, but body type wise, dude's he's built, he's ripped, you know what I mean? He's a very strong, low center of gravity, big arms, big legs, and you see with that power, it's full body for him. Where if you let him get a running start at the tackle and he goes to that bull rush, it's typically night for him. You know what I mean? And then, like I said, for me, it's like also I think part of that conversation is like how can you use these guys just in general? How do they win, right? And I look at a guy like with Von Miller. Von Miller is when you talk about 3-4 edge rushers, it's Von Miller and it's everybody else. You know what I'm saying? That dude is an absolute animal, bro. Like technically refined. But the bend, everybody has been like, it's almost like it's the same way we look at with quarterbacks and sometimes receivers. That specific skill that he has, that bend that nobody else truly has, but you always look for it. I think it was Harold Landry when he came out. People compared his bend to Von Miller. I'm like, it's a little different. It's different though. It's
TJ Watt is a guy that you can throw out there, but it's still different, right? But he's probably the next level of those 3-4 outside linebackers. But DP, to your point, right? When you talked about the bend, that's something that you should look for in the edge, especially a 3-4 guy, right? Like it's like you have to be a good athlete. Like I want to see you bend. I want to see you be able to be nimble. Like how many times have we seen Von Miller dip that shoulder and he's almost horizontal to the field, and he's able to still kind of bend and turn the corner on these offensive
tackles. Back up like a jack in the box.
And just pop right back up, right? Like that's special. And like you said, that's still his special trait, but that's also made what you want more in the 3-4 outside linebackers. And then how you describe the Nick Bosa, right? Like now you're talking about converting speed to power. So you may not need as much bend if your functional strength is on a much more elite level, right? Like when you could just easily convert speed to power, but you're still a high level athlete. And I think, man, when it comes down to this edge discussion, it's probably a conversation we can have for an hour, right? But DP, there's another element of this that I want to add, right? And that's how you started this podcast off, right? You was talking about technique, right? And then you got into just the natural tools that you have. And it's this kind of similar conversation that we have with a lot of other positions, quarterbacks, right? Like, do we want the tools or do we want the accuracy, right? It to be proven already. So we're going to get into these edge rushers because there are guys, and we've seen the Baltimore Ravens consistently take swings on guys like Odafe Owe, David Ajabo, these guys, the New Orleans Saints, right, take swings on Peyton Turner, Marcus Davenport. So we want to get into the tools versus the technique, and what do we like to see when we're talking about not just those elite level guys, but maybe the second, third, fourth round guys, and we'd be like, hey, that's a draft steal because I lean either towards the tools or the technique of that player.
Tools or technique is the perfect way to frame this, Keith, because it lends you to, all right, what do you prefer? And that's why I was a technique guy over tools back then. You know what I mean? When I was young Dame, when I was young DP, but now that I'm full-time Dame, I'm more of the tools. And that's to an extent, Keith, that's almost with every position, because like, it's like, okay, I get, like, from a scouting standpoint, I get it. What can I teach you? What can I teach you? Like, I can't teach, I can't teach Will Anderson. I can't stretch him to 6'5". You know what I mean? He could blow up to 272, but I don't know how well it's going to work for him. You know what I mean? Right. In terms of adding that weight. But when you have a Myles Garrett, right, you're so physically gifted and dominant. The technique, the rush plan, the ability to read the steps and the drop of a tackle, I could teach you all those things as a coach. You know what I mean? And it's, don't get me wrong, it's a tricky situation because it's all based on, and this goes back to draft philosophy. As you know, it's about interviewing the kid, interviewing the prospect, because no matter how toolsy or gifted you are, I need to know, do you have the mentality to work to get better? If you don't have that, then I don't care about your tools. I'd rather go and get somebody that I know is going to put the work in. You know what I mean? But like, if I got a guy, a perfect world, if I got a guy that has the height, the weight, the speed, and everything else, and he's going to put the work in, that's the guy I want, because the technique can always be taught. Like we always talk about, there's specialists for everything in terms of coaching. There's a wide receiver coaches as specialists, running back coaches, QB coaches, and pass rush specialists. Brandon T. Jordan, who is, I think he was independent at first, then he was with Michigan State, and I think he was the Seahawks.
Yeah, he's with the Seahawks now. Then another guy I want to give a shout out to, and I don't know if our listeners listening to this, but he tagged us in a Twitter post. Coach Chuck Smith, man, I had opportunity to talk with him a couple of times during my time at LSU in recruiting. Highly knowledgeable guy, but he's actually
works with Von Miller.
Yeah, and he's with the Baltimore Ravens now. And so that's what our listener had, he had tweeted at us and was like, hey, check this out. In regards to exactly Odafe Awe and David Ajabo. So that was kind of cool just to listen to him talk about them. But DP, like the other element of the tools versus technique is, which tools are you looking for, right? Because I think that, it's like, okay, the guy runs in a straight line really fast. It's like, okay, that's a tool, right? And then the guy bench presses, 40 times, like, oh, he's really strong. That's a tool. You know what I'm saying? Or he has great arm length. Like I want to have this conversation because it goes into a guy like Andre Carter, right? Where, you're seeing some sack production, and then when you watch the film, you see like, oh, in open space, he has some closing speed, but then everybody looked at him was like, man, this guy's 6'5", he runs in a straight line fast, right? And he has length. But you have to make sure you're using the right tools, because that's not necessarily the tools that I want to apply, right? Like, it's two things that I look for. It's functional athleticism and functional strength. Functional athleticism, to me, you're talking about the definition, right? It's how the athleticism applies to that position. And same thing for strength. Functional strength, how does his strength apply to playing that position? And that's the two things I look for. So if a guy may not necessarily be, a top round pick, but he checks the functional athleticism and functional strength, but the technique isn't there, I'm like, okay, at least he has those. I can teach everything else. And that's the reason why you talk about a guy like Byron Young. I was so high on him, right? Because I'm like, I see the athleticism and I see the strength there for him to be a high level, productive athlete.
No, I love that, Keith, because it is true, right? The functional on field stuff, because the training stuff, like, it's cool, but it doesn't, like, if you don't translate it to the field, like we talked about Will Levis, like, it's good to let me see you throw it 60 yards in a training session. You know what I mean? Now, can you translate that to the field? I don't care what you run in the 40, like Anthony Richardson 4.44, or there was rumors he ran a 4.38. That's on tape. I mean, I don't even mean to bring this up, but he burned, LSU on a run.
I mean, there was other schools you could have brought up. DP, there was definitely other schools you could have brought up.
It was the first one. It was the first one that came to my mind, but he got Utah for a long one, week one. So it's all about, like you said, functional being on the field. but like the natural stuff is more so what you see in a training session.
Yeah, and I would even go to this, right? Like, because we talked about the arm length, athleticism, the height, weight discussion, right? Let's throw out a couple names where, when we're talking about the short area quickness, functional athleticism may not have been there. And two guys that come up to me, Taco Charlton, when he was drafted out of Michigan, right, was another big guy. But when you watch the film, it's like, okay, does he have that athleticism that's, like top-notch level to where if the sack production wasn't there, I'm still going to buy in. Then the other guy would be your tier Myles Garrett that plays for the Carolina Panthers. I looked at those guys kind of in the same light. Why, I just don't know if they have enough functional athleticism to win on the edges, right? And that's where you kind of get caught up because they do check, and that's why we brought it up, right? They check the height, the weight, like they check the arm length boxes, but now it's like, okay, now what about that functional athleticism to be able to win on the edges to beat those offensive tackles?
No, bro, that's a perfect, that's perfect because at the end of the day, like Yetur Gross-Matos, as a matter of fact, like after going to the Panthers, he's bulked up. You know what I mean? To try and play
probably
more
move him inside.
Yeah, to move him inside, and that's why now, like bringing in, I think Evero, who was a defense coordinator, I think for the Denver Broncos last year, I think is their new DC. And, or Dom Capers or whoever, like they run more of a 3-4. So he's not seeing any edge play.
No.
You know what I'm saying? At his size. And even if he was back to his college size, he still wouldn't be relied upon as a 3-4 outside linebacker because like you talked about, he doesn't have the on-field athleticism or short area quickness or twitch to win. And then he just didn't have the like a Nick Bosa where it's, all right, I'm strong, I'm powerful, and I know how to work outside angles and inside angles, and Yetur Gross-Matos doesn't offer any of that.
Yeah, no, I agree, and that was I found fun, right? And that's some of the development as we go through this process. And you say we're getting better as talent evaluators, and you continue to dive into. You start separating things, right? Like, and you start diving in, like, okay, yeah, maybe he can play edge, right? But this is not a guy that I'm banking on giving me 10 sacks a season. This is more of a 5-6 sack season guy. And I like the two names I've thrown out there. I would put those names in there: the Marcus Davenport and the Peyton Turner. They go right into that conversation. Unfortunately, the Saints drafted both of them, right? Like, and they keep going after it. Another guy that, and the jury's still out on him, right? But Logan Hall out of University of Houston.
Yeah,
he was a very polarizing name, and I think the Bucks took him the top of the second.
Yes, like second round.
Yeah, the top of the second. So we're still trying to figure out, if that athleticism will be able to be applied, even though he checks the height, weight, athleticism. He was athletic enough as far as with testing when we're talking about applied athleticism and functional athleticism.
And to close that, like we talked about with the offensive tackles, some guys that played tackle in college, they get kicked inside the guard. Some of these defensive ends and edge rushers in college, when you get to the league, the best path for you is probably to add 20 pounds and play more of a four technique, 4-eye, and play more inside. And because typically those guys have like you said, the height, the weight, and the length, and then you hope that that arm length and wingspan advantage can allow them to be productive to beat typically shorter arm guards and be a long arm puncher and collapse the pocket in front of the quarterback. But guys, that's our discussion on the top 5 edge rushers over the last decade, man. And a lot of polarizing names, a lot of production, just a great and fun discussion. Building the perfect edge, as well as what do you prefer, tools or technique? Something can be taught and some things can't. So, like I said, appreciate y'all tapping in with us. Go subscribe and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode as soon as it's available. Thank y'all so much for joining us and making Locked On NFL Draft your first listen today and every day, Monday through Friday. We appreciate y'all for being family and our every single dayers, man. But as always, come and join us again tomorrow, because tomorrow we're going to get into some defensive tackles. Where does Jalen Carter rank over the last 10 years of defensive tackles? And is this a Hall of Famer that's going to be on our list? We'll talk about that tomorrow. Just hold your horses. We'll talk about it tomorrow. But guys, as always, in terms of Twitter, you can find and follow Keith Sanchez at DTalentCode. Me, Damian Parson, DP_NFL. Come and join the conversation again tomorrow on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.